the parliament. Wipe all of the lines from your mouth and eyes. Betting on the loss, shorting the pound of flesh. Where do we get our meaning from? 4/5 of the working week. Walk into a home under guarantee. We don't have to break every brick. Pull 1 or 2 out.
My name's Victoria. I am a singer-songwriter. I've been doing that since God was born. When did I start doing that? Probably in the 90s sometime. And at the same time, I've always worked in hospitals and healthcare spaces and with health and well-being and medicine.
And you break us in your tantrums when what's scarce is love. Scarce is love.
I think I put out an EP in about 2012, which arrived to enormous acclaim from about 4 people. And I've been playing live for a long time, both in the UK and then in South Africa when I lived there for about 10 years. And I've put out a few EPs actually, but it's been a mixture. The stuff that I've released has always been a bit of a mixture of, if you like, straight down the line singer-songwriter stuff and stuff that's a bit more focused on a particular issue, often health. So, because some kind of conventional EPs and some projects that have had a particular focus, and the project ones have often involved interviews with people who've had particular experiences. I think I've been trying to find a way of writing songs. You get to a point with songwriting, or I got to a point now where I got bored of writing about my personal experiences and wanted to keep songwriting. But I suppose I was finding the stuff I was getting emotionally interested in wasn't so much, my broken heart, which I've written about a million times. And I kind of run out of things to say about that. So I wanted to try and find a way of writing about things in the world other than me. I mean, I do still do a lot of that. There's still a lot of that. But you just get a bit old for that shit really after a certain point. It's really not the most interesting thing that's happening in the world.
I occupy nothing. I'm a bruise, a Porsche.
First time I got in touch with Lost Map was through Ardem, who helped with the Delirium project. He worked as a kind of producer on that for me, which was amazing. I've never even met Ardem in person, but he got interested in it through my colleague Quinta, who'd played on it, who's an amazing musician. She's playing on this new album as well. Anyway, Ardem introduced me to Lost Map, and then Johnny released an EP called Closing in 16, I think. And that was the first thing that I released with Lost Map. I think there were 5 songs on that, and that was great. It was really brilliant to work with Lost Map with that. It just meant that it was just amazing to be part of a little musical community. I've not released anything full as a solo artist. I did do an EP. When was it? 2021, I think. It was during lockdown, so I have no idea what year it was. It was during that time. With a band called Copies, which was like a sort of 3 singer-songwriters all working together. Me and my husband, Chris Letcher, and another songwriter called Matthew Funderbunt. And we each wrote 2 songs and put that out. And it was a joint release between Lost Map and Shifty Records in South Africa. So for a long time I ran an arts programme in hospitals, and then eventually about 15 years ago I tried to sort of bring those 2 things together. Started writing music about experiences of health and medicine. I did a couple of quite big projects about delirium in hospital, another project about the experience of hearing voices. It's always been a bit slanted towards mental health, I suppose you could argue. Although another project about living with chronic respiratory disease. My sort of double professional life has kind of evolved, and more recently I've been running a national organisation called the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance, and we do a lot of work on strategy around health, and in particular around health equity and what role culture and creativity might play in that. And that's kind of evolved into thinking about the structures that underpin our health, I guess. And the one that I keep bumping into is the economy. The unhealthiness of our economy, if you like, and the way that has been driving climate change. But it's something we find it very difficult to talk about as a society. There's sort of there's a kind of general assumption that the economic system we have is the economic system we have, is the economic system we have, and it is as good as it's ever going to get, and it's a kind of neutral entity that is a rational force in society. And I mean, obviously not everybody thinks that. There's always been a healthy anti-capitalist movement, but I think I wanted to understand more about that and to become a bit more articulate about it, because it felt like all the conversations I've been having about health, both as a musician and as a sort of strategist in that space, are kind of blocked if I can't understand the economy that's underpinning it. I'm going to have a go at defining degrowth. I'll use a quote from Jason Hickel's book, because that was kind of influenced the whole project, really. He describes it as a planned downscaling of energy and resource use to bring the economy back into balance with the living world in a safe, just and equitable way. That might mean things in practical terms like shortening the working week, redistributing income and wealth more fairly, so a lot of that's to do with taxation, investing in public goods like universal healthcare, education, affordable housing. There's another quote from another author called Serge Latouche, which is about building a society in which we can live better lives whilst working less and consuming less. I suppose I came to it from sort of thinking about GDP, gross domestic product, a bit, and there are lots of conversations happening a while ago now about how we might move away from GDP as the only measure of our sort of success as countries, international measure of success, and towards something that's much more about well-being. And that's aligned quite closely with my other professional life, which is all about culture and creativity and well-being. A lot of people don't talk about degrowth, partly because there's a sort of negative connotation in that term, and talk instead about well-being economies or steady-state economies. I'm sure that there are differences between those things that I don't understand, so I don't mean to conflate things that aren't the same. But the fundamental principle is about sort of moving us away from the growth imperative and towards something that is sustainable within ecological bounds, and that is at the same time about equity between people and nature. Rejoining two things that have been artificially divided, people and nature. What makes us well in the first place? What makes us more likely to get better if we do get unwell? What exacerbates illness? And eventually that kind of leads you to the economy, because it is the sort of unspoken system that governs everything. And it has always felt to me a bit like it's something that we don't... I have a humanities background. I studied English at university, and I've always worked in the arts, but I've always worked in health contexts as well. But I don't have any understanding of the economy, really. It was never taught at school. It's not something I feel literate about. I didn't feel like I could sort of take a position or have an informed conversation about the economy. I still don't completely feel that, but it feels important that we get past that, and that we sort of feel we can have a conversation about this stuff, even if we only try to. It's sort of partly a frustration with the way that the system gets presented as a kind of inevitability.
You know, there's a famous saying by Frederick Jameson who said, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Like, the objective should be to make it easier to imagine the end of capitalism than the end of the world. And I think that the only way to do that is through art. I don't see any way around that.
Body borrowed from the air, a temporary house of knowing.
How did I make the leap from thinking about health and equity to songwriting? I think if it's what's on your mind, then that's what you should be trying to write about, maybe. A better answer is that I think I use songwriting as a way of understanding things. I think that's probably why I've always done it. And when I was younger, it was about kind of understanding the emotional vortexes that I was managing to get myself into. And now it's about trying to understand stuff in the world that I find difficult, complex, contradictory. I find the economy and health structures kind of opaque and complex, and this is a way for me to try and figure it out. But also I don't like the idea that there are certain things you can write about as a songwriter and certain things that you ought to leave to the professionals. I think it's quite important that we try and write stuff about real things. I knew I wanted to use Jason's work to write something about, and I didn't know quite how, but I did feel that it would be good to try and speak to people who, rather than sort of be all kind of doomy and woe is me, the system is broken. I mean, the system is broken, but there are lots of people who are attempting to fix it, to build a new system. I wanted to interview people who were enacting those measures, basically, in one way or another. So the people I spoke to were Jason Hickel, Daisy Mott, a freelance artist, Brian Smith, who works with Transform Community Development in Dundee, Victoria McQuillan, who works with the Scottish Library and Information Council on a scheme called Lend and Mend, which is about lending things like power tools out and bringing people into library spaces to use things like sewing machines and lastly I spoke to Shona McIntosh, who's the Scottish Green Party councillor for East Lothian.
Definitely, I think the whole way we look at the economy as consumers has to change, and we have to be, rather than just this endless pursuit of more stuff.
But look at all the gains.
One of them in the book talks about ending planned obsolescence, for example. So I was really interested in people that were, working towards a circular economy. Another one's about ending food waste, and I spoke to somebody who is kind of working with food systems to make sure the food that would otherwise be wasted is being redistributed in an equitable way. Yeah. Once I started speaking to people, the same thing happens as always happens when I speak to people for this kind of work. People say really amazing, interesting things, and that just fires off ideas, and people use amazing analogies and metaphors all the time. We all do it all the time in our speech, and those are what actually form the basis of the songs, really.
Under the oblivious structures, something moves deeper than what looked like foundations. Lines run through.
Oblivious structures is quite a direct response to things that Daisy said about mycelial networks and the ways in which those systems echo the way in which social movements form, but also suggest something about the natural world that we've forgotten and are only beginning to remember, which is the sort of interrelationship across the natural world, the codependency, if you like, of everything. And Jason also talks about this a lot in his book, about the sort of way that mushrooms operate being kind of symbolic of something that we're only just beginning to get our heads around, about how nature and humanity are codependent. It's not a question of humanity kind of controlling and manipulating nature to its own ends. That was such an obviously strong image to try and turn into a song.
Yeah, and we rely on mushrooms to literally decompose. So in any kind of decaying of like trees and all forms of plants and things, after death, like there is growth and that kind of, And I do think there is a lot of metaphors to be made about mushrooms and how the mycelial networks like are kind of like underground and working together and sort of like spreading information and bringing it's just it's a really good metaphor for social justice. Like even under the concrete when we're walking, there's mycelial networks like pretty much everywhere. And it's really cool to learn about it because then you just feel that connection wherever you are.
Here grows an unlikely alliance in the underfoot.
Yeah, so once I'd interviewed people, I'd transcribe the interviews, listen to them again, and then in some cases I used a couple of audio quotes to sort of try and structure songs, and in most cases it was more, it was a looser relationship than that. So then I demoed about 5 songs. It took me ages to get them ready, and then shared those with the people I'd interviewed and with the other musicians I was going to be working with, so Chris Letcher, Quinta and Andy Hamill, and we had a session together with the musicians, trying to sort of work those songs a bit, did a little bit of recording, did quite a lot of thinking about, I suppose, the sort of sound world, not to sound too pretentious.
Why has this not just transformed what we're doing yet? I don't understand why people aren't listening to this. I did see an interesting thing that was saying like degrowth, like the word degrowth maybe puts people off, and it's better to talk about, I quite liked his talk about steady state economy, just kind of keeping things, but just the idea of maintenance rather than growth.
A steady state, no acceleration. See that cliff? Wouldn't you like to slow the car down? See.
Steady state came partly from a couple of things that Shona said about steady state economics, and sort of thinking about that term degrowth and instead thinking about a steady state and what that might mean. I had a really clear image that was sort of forming throughout the process of thinking about all of this stuff of a funnel. Well, the line in the song is sucks up nature and time. I guess I was reading a lot about extractive capitalism and how there's the way that capitalism works to kind of draw all the resources into the 1%, basically, and it hoovers up everything. It hoovers up our natural resources, our kind of human resources. I had all sorts of associated images, like the way that, like a kind of 80s city boy sniffing coke, a funnel going straight up his nose, but which was kind of echoes in another song later on the album, Barbarians, which does reference quite directly the cocaine in the Houses of Parliament. But yeah, this funnel felt like a very real thing. I suppose I was trying to explain degrowth, but this image of the funnel was kind of dominating it.
See how the road rushes up to meet us. This is restraint, we all understand.
Bad Lover was an attempt to speak to capitalism as if it were a person, a kind of abusive lover, basically. And I was thinking about the ways in which abusive behaviour is often excused or sort of facilitated by the system.
You steal all
the way that we're constantly told on the radio that we must strive for growth, we have GDP as our only goal. I mean, it's such a universal kind of, sort of presented as a truism, but it's actually an abusive culture. So I was trying to characterise capitalism, I guess, as a person, as a way of speaking more directly to it.
Your heart's too swollen. The shadow casts everywhere.
I enjoy the distillation process, trying to figure out something complex and, I suppose, represent it in my own terms, ultimately. It's like writing an essay at school, isn't it? Take this topic and figure out a way of explaining it to yourself and other people. There's something about the structure of songwriting, and it wouldn't have to be songwriting, it could be other art forms, but for me it works that helps me to make sense of complex things. There's a sort of shape to it. And maybe it's because it allows for things like metaphor. It doesn't always have to be completely logical. I do feel as if I've expressed something that I've been trying to think about, I suppose, and that I feel strongly about. I don't know how successfully, but that maybe is beside the point. I feel pleased that we have managed to produce an album that feels like quite a difficult thing to do all by itself.
Rather the barbarians latched onto the state till they milk it dry. White dust in the parliament.
The original intention was to have a conversation, I guess, for a few more people to have a conversation about this stuff, which sounds a bit evangelical. I suppose it is in a way. To bring the economy more firmly into the centre of the conversations that we're all having all the time about our systems and why they're not working, and climate breakdown specifically. It would be great if listening to the songs leads people to find out more about these other people's work, because that's really inspiring.
We don't have to invent it all from scratch.